Thank you, Monty. And thanks y'all for coming to this little presentation this morning. It's a pretty small group. Y'all know each other reasonably well. So if I say something provocative or something that you'd like to discuss more in the body of this talk, please interrupt me and we can have more of a conversation. I'm really here to talk about how GIS can participate in a meaningful way in the information fabric about facilities. It was really interesting to hear this morning's keynote about BIM. I'm a huge fan of BIM. I think it's awesome, particularly for design and construction. I think it really is transforming the way buildings are designed and built, and that's awesome. When it comes to operating buildings, when it comes to operating our campuses, which is more than just buildings, I think BIM is an interesting and important component of that information fabric, but it's not enough. BIM in and of itself, it's not where you're going to schedule your classes, it's not your CMMS and work order system, there's so much other information that you and your team require to do your jobs well that can't and won't ever be persisted in a BIM. I think we really need to take a really holistic view at all of our information requirements and how do we provide those to our users in a way that's easiest for them to consume and understand and act upon. So that's what I'm going to talk about and show some examples of a little bit this morning. But before we get there, let's start with the basics. Now you guys know all this stuff. This is why you're in business, but you ought to take a minute to pat yourself on the back. You are managing the facilities for your institution, and those are mission critical. There's no way that your institution can deliver at the level it needs to without your facilities operating at a very high level. They are your largest financial asset. Don here represents the real property portfolio of the University of Michigan. Think of the amount of financial investment in that real estate portfolio. It's huge. It's also very likely your second largest set of expenses right behind salaries and wages. So from a capital investment point of view, from an ongoing operations point of view, the money is very real. You've got this really interesting, complex set of utilities and infrastructure and buildings and spaces and people, all that needs active management and planning. Unfortunately, today, our facilities are also a source of vulnerability. So our public safety folks have a really active interest in all of the information that you all are managing. And to the extent that they don't have access to that information in a way that's easy and actionable, that really compromises the safety and security of our campuses. And then, of course, there's the students, there's the faculties, there's the visitors, there's Susie's mom who's come to visit, and she needs to find her way around campus. She needs to find, well, where are the porta potties at the football game, all that kind of just user information. And there's tens of thousands of folks across campus that need access to the information that y'all are managing, and they probably don't have great access to it today. So all these people have different interests in different kinds of information about your campuses. The executives are interested in financial performance. They're interested in capital budgets, operational budgets, condition assessments. How are we going to get our buildings up to a particular set of conditions? The operations professionals. It was fascinating listening to Ohio State just before this talk started. Well, you know, the guys on the third shift have a hard time finding the valve. They don't know whether the valve's been exercised. If it hasn't been exercised, where are the other valves that they need to shut off? All this information is information you all have your fingers in, and they need better access to. And oh, by the way, the critical question about when the last time those valves were exercised is never going to be in your BIM. That's in your CMMS. The CMMS and the BIM need to talk to each other. There needs to be interoperability and connectivity there, but they're not the same system. They shouldn't be the same system. Your public safety folks, where are all my CCTV cameras? What can they see? Which ones are up? Which ones are down? Which ones are analog? Which ones are digital? Which ones do I need to upgrade? Where are my blind spots? How do I've got University of Alabama has, I think, 2,500 cameras on their campus. How many of those cameras do you think the guy that's operating the CCTV system in the control room knows where they are? A couple of dozen, maybe, if he's been around a while. 2,500 cameras. What's the value of those to security if he doesn't know where they are and what their status is? And then, of course, the constituents, they have a very different need for information and a different way of accessing information. If they can't get it on their phone, it doesn't exist. So how do I get information about what's going on campus to my visitors, to my students, to my faculty in a way that's really easy for them to get at? You guys know this better than anybody, but FM is a really diverse set of business problems. And you guys are in the process or in the business of managing information or helping all these folks manage information about their particular focus on campus. Whether that's space management, a lot of you are involved in space management in one shape or form, environmental health and compliance, CMMS, your asset and work system, capital project management, energy performance. So there's another thing that kept coming up in my mind this morning during the BIM talk was energy and many other parts of your facilities operations are continuous transactional kinds of information sources, right? Depending on how well your campus is metered, you may be able to understand changes in energy performance on a minute by minute or an hourly by hourly, certainly a monthly basis. None of that comes back into your BIM. How could it? There's no structure for that kind of data in your BIM. So you need to understand the relationship between energy consumption and the BIM, but the BIM is not the place where you're going to understand ongoing energy performance issues, right? So you've got all kinds of different business problems around the campus that you're trying to manage information about. A lot of these systems have their own big iron solutions. You've got 25 Live for scheduling. You've got Banner for your employee management. You've got some CMMS for asset and work management. You've got project management, so you may have any of a variety of different capital project management systems out there. You've got this, oh my God, shared drive out there with all this collective information that nobody can find anything about unless they happen to be the project manager that knows what the project number of that particular information was, that they can dig into the shared drive and find it, right? So it's a really interesting and challenging set of information management problems that you all, as the technology folks, are charged with helping your managers resolve. The one thing all of these systems, and there's a whole lot of paper and spreadsheets in the mix in the middle of this too, right? The one thing all of these systems have in common is that they're managing information about a location on the campus. And that information might be lease docs like Don's dealing with. They might be images. They might be spreadsheets. It might be a feed from 25 Live. It might be a feed from your CMMS. All of that is about a particular location. And when you're trying to make a decision about what you're going to do today, whether I'm going to maintain a particular facility or I'm doing space planning, I likely need to have access to many of these different pieces of information to fully inform the decision about what my actions are. So if we can create an environment, a user environment, where they have access to all these different sources of information based on the location that they're trying to make a decision about, it's really highly useful, highly intuitive. It really is a great decision support system. That doesn't make, and the GIS, of course, is a great way to feed the location aspect of this, right? That doesn't mean that the GIS can or should be the system of record for space scheduling any more than the BIM should be, right? The GIS is an enabling technology. It is not the system of record for many of these things. It may be the system of record for some of these things, for your utilities and infrastructure, that sort of thing. But it can certainly be a way to aggregate and present information to users in a way that they can act on a really geo-aware decision support system, if you will. So last year, if you came to, oh, that's terrible, I'm sorry. If you came to this talk, I presented the 7 laws of information, and I was really flattered that Michelle actually remembered one of these laws. This morning she called it out. The one we're going to focus on today is number 5, which you probably can't read because the slide is so terrible, but it reads, the value of information increases when combined with other information. So if I can bring in a feed if I'm storing my inventory of education assets like the screen and the projector and that sort of thing, if I'm storing that in 25 Live, and I have images that are stored on a file system, and I'm trying to figure out whether I can plan this particular space for a particular use. If I can pull all those things together, then I have a more valuable information product than I did with any of those different pieces independently. Does that make sense? So let me show you some examples of this, and this will make a little more sense. So this is a campus customer in the Mid-Atlantic, and the business problem here is underground utilities and infrastructure. The combination here is the location of the utilities and infrastructure. That's pretty obvious. That's a classic GIS thing. But what isn't obvious is that they are tracking all of the work against every time they have a repair order that goes out, they track a bunch of information about that repair. Now, they don't have a real sophisticated CMMS, so they don't have something like Cartograph or Maximo or something like that they would use to do their work management there, but they do have a pretty structured a system of Microsoft Access and some other materials that they're able to then attach that information to the underground infrastructure, so they can understand where do I have pipes or valves that are consistently needing more and more maintenance. This is the same customer, but they're looking for more real-time information here. So in this case, we've got a chilled water system, and the chilled water system is censored, and what they're looking for is, I want to know and I want to be shown on the map whenever I have a condition in the chilled water system that goes out of bounds. I've got a temperature or a pressure or something that is out of range. I want that to light up on the map so that I can then dig more deeply and find out what might be causing that problem. Again, you've got a non-spatial source tied back to the map to help you understand what's going on campus. This is an indoor example of the same kind of problem. In this case, we've got the location of the building management system sensors inside the building. So all of those are BMS sensors that are feeding information back into the interactive map to help them understand inside the building how is my building management system working today. Space management is a whole different set of concerns, and in space management and space planning, you're often trying to evaluate a a space for a potential use. Either I'm going to move people in there or I'm going to schedule a class there, and I need to know whether or not that space is fit for purpose. So I need information about the shape of the space. I also need photographs of the inside of the space are really helpful. In this particular case, you can see down here we have a live pull from 25 Live. So in this particular example, the customer is using 25 Live to inventory all of their HVAC, all of their education equipment, So they can click on a space and see the space, but also see what kind of equipment is in there that would support a particular use. Again, different system of record, but pulled into the map, because what I really want to know is, for that particular space, is that fit for purpose? Another example of understanding space as fit for purpose is in the lead up to a renovation. So in this particular case, this is an older facility, and they're concerned for a lot of very good reasons about asbestos in the facility. So every dot you see on the map there is an asbestos sample. The green ones are ones where the sample was benign. There's nothing to worry about here. The red ones are samples where there was something found, and you can dig now more deeply into the information about that and understand whether or not it has been remediated yet, and if not, what the implications of that are for a renovation project. Safety and security. So a really common business problem of your safety and security folks is to manage your emergency evacuation plans. They're everywhere, right? And somebody has to actually create an inventory of these and maintain them so that you can replace them and inspect them and such. So here we are in the GIS creating the line work and the features that are part of that plan, and then printing that out in a form that you can stick in the little cellulite thing outside the door, so that you can maintain and manage your safety and security plans. So again, we've got a set of floor plans maintained by somebody, probably the space folks, because they're the ones that have access to that. But you're making these available to your safety and security folks for their business problem, which is maintaining these emergency action plans. And those emergency action plans are often more than just this kind of evacuation route. They're often more comprehensive in terms of the whole site. So if I have a fire, here's how the different response agencies are going to position themselves. Here's where the rally points are that the folks are going to show up to. Here are the annunciation panels for the fire safety system and that sort of thing. So my favorite example here is this is a school safety system. Again, this happens to be out in Washington State. The base floor plans are maintained by the facilities team. There's a school scheduling system that happens to be eSchool Plus. They're maintaining the information about which class is in which space for every period in the day. You can see we have, well, you probably can't read it very well, but I've got how many kids are in the space, what is the teacher's name, is the space over or under occupied, and are there any special needs kids in the space? All that's coming from the space scheduling system, and that changes as the day goes on. So period 1, period 2, period 3, the information is different, right? We've also got CCTV camera feeds, so I can click on one of these CCTV camera feeds and pull up information about, I can pull up a live feed from that camera. And these door locks here, you can see, I can actually lock or unlock the door. So if the officer comes to the door of the facility and it's locked, I can respond to that. I can first check on the CCTV camera and make sure it's actually Officer Jones at the door, unlock the facility, and then give him kind of play-by-play access of which rooms are occupied and which aren't. This is deployed in the school district's Security Operations Center, which is awesome, but what they really are most encouraged about is their ability to then publish this out to their police department and the county dispatch center, because in the event of an unfortunate incident, it's going to be agencies outside of the school district that are called on to respond, and you need to help them understand the environment they're going into, right? Okay, so we've talked now about a lot of different examples of how to combine information from different sources into the map in a way to make it more useful. There are some patterns, some best practices that you should be aware of and think about if you're thinking this is something that you want to get involved with. First and foremost is information security. I think in this room, we probably have a sophisticated enough understanding of the fact that a base floor plan with no other information on it than the architecturals is a pretty benign thing. It's not a terribly sensitive document. It becomes sensitive when you start adding other layers of information onto it. If I've got a floor plan of a military base and it's just a floor plan, that's one thing. If I identify where the general's office is, suddenly that information is more interesting and more sensitive, and it's really the information about the general's habitation of the office that's sensitive, not the base floor plan, right? So you can take that approach of understanding or kind of analyzing and understanding and communicating which parts of my information stream, my information sources are sensitive, which parts of this information do the different personas I'm serving need to have access to, how am I going to be authenticating those users to this system to help break down barriers of information security that tend to come up. This is more of a political problem than a technical problem usually. If you're interested, there's a great paper put out by the RAND Corporation. It's quite old now. It's put out in 2004, called Mapping the Risk. So back in the early days of Google Earth, anybody old enough to remember those days? There was a lot of angst, particularly in the national security community, about the fact that suddenly the whole world was going to have access to some pretty good satellite imagery. Actually, in some cases, some very good satellite imagery. And so for the first time, many of the country's national security infrastructure was going to be publicly available. So the RAND Corporation was hired to do this analysis of what were the benefits and risks of publicly available geo information. And it's a great read. And they lay out really a whole process for doing sensitivity analysis, particularly for location-based information. But you can extend that to really your whole facilities information portfolio to identify where does this information have benefit to whom? Where could this information be used for nefarious purposes and by whom? And then enable that conversation of how to balance the benefits and the risks. It's a great read, and it's still very, very applicable today. Once you understand and can design which information you want to deliver in combination to which people, then the technical question of how you're going to authenticate and authorize people to that particular system of record can be handled. Today, that technical barrier is imminently doable. and you have to manage permissions about that. But the technical barrier there often is much less difficult to overcome than the political conversations within your organization about, I can't let the geography department see how I'm using my space because that's my space, right? Yeah. Okay, so we've got information security that we have to deal with. We have to also figure out which information we want to pull in from our source system. So 25 Live is an amazing system that captures all kinds of information, some portion of which is useful to a space planner at a particular point in time that we want to enable, right? So you have to figure out what information do I want to pull from these various source systems because it's useful. I thought the observation of the BIM porn slide this morning was awesome because you get these construction BIMs delivered and hey, isn't that awesome? Well, honestly, no, because now I have to filter out from all that pornographic deliverable what's actually useful to me to operate this facility. And oh, by the way, in spite of all the porn beauty there's really important things that are missing, like space definitions. Don't need a space definition to build a building. I sure do need it to operate it though, so anyway. From time to time, you're gonna find that different systems of record will have different ways of organizing their information. So 25 Live, another example, I keep referring to them, but it happens to be important to the integration story. They have a way of identifying sites, buildings, floors, and spaces. So they've got their whole ID structure, and they've got that whole inventory created, and it works great for them. Now you come at this, you bring your FIS to the table, your Facilities Information System, and you've got your own way of identifying sites, buildings, floors, and spaces. And they may not be the same. So then what do? Well, you gotta have some sort of a crosswalk that allows you to say, oh, well, you call this thing A, I call this thing 12. They mean the same thing, so now I can share information back and forth across system boundaries. All of this is designed to enable aggregation and analysis of information. I've got 10,000 work orders in my CMMS. I'm interested in 25 of those so that I can understand a pattern that's related to this corner of this building. I've got a leaky roof. Is that caused by some sort of vibration in the HVAC system on the roof? What's the complex of issues going on in that building that helps me really understand how to deal with that? So aggregation is great, but you then have to be able to filter down, and of course, me being the GIS bigot that I am, I think that location is a really important part of that filter capability to get at the information that is actionable. And then you need to understand how often and how much data do you want to interchange with your other system of record. In some cases, it may be enough to click on the room, go out to another system, get information about that room to display for decision support in the context of that particular workflow. I don't need to persist that in any way because that other system is doing that. So in the 25 Live example, I'm going to click on my room. I'm going to go get a list of equipment that's in that room. I'm not going to save that or anything. If I need to go back to that room, I'll ask for 25 Live for that list of equipment again. In other cases, in the case of work order management, for instance, you may actually want to be able to persist that data locally for analysis. So maybe I want to be able to run a rendering across campus of all the assets with an accumulated maintenance cost of over a particular threshold over the past 90 days. Well, that's a really interesting and valuable analysis. but I got to bring a bunch of data over from my CMMS to be able to analyze that in the GIS. So your strategy of what data I'm going to pull over in what context and what data I'm going to persist in my local system varies on the use case and the analysis that you're trying to support. At the end of the day, again, me with my GIS big hat on, I think that the potential benefit to particularly your managers, the folks that are really making operational decisions about how they're deploying assets, how they are planning for capital and operational investments, your ability to provide them better, more holistic, and more integrated information is totally worth the effort. It's really where you get the return on investment from your facilities information systems, is being able to aggregate this in a way that can be readily understood and readily actionable by folks in the field. So with that all said, I'd really like to hear about how these concepts are playing out in your world. I think your hands-on experience in all these different issues is actually much more interesting to each other than me up here prattling on. So I'd love to hear if you have any particular questions about what I've presented, but I'd love to hear about your experience in trying to achieve these kinds of things in your world too. Anybody? Scott.
I'm from Dallas County Community College District, so we're not a big university, but we have 100,000 students at any time, and we have 7 independent colleges. We're 50 years old. We spend $550 million a year as our process, and we don't have any system of record for any of this at all. We only teach it in one of the programs. We don't use it or do it. So it was, my hardest part was convincing people they need something they've never had before when they've been able. So finally we have floated a big bond. We're selling 7 pieces of downtown Dallas property. And so I had a meeting with our CFO, CIO, Chancellor, and Vice Chancellor and said, if you guys don't want to use an integrated data environment this year, you all need to be looking for new jobs next year for not having done this job right now. And they kind of, well, I'm also faculty and I can't get rid of me right now. President of our faculty senate as well. So anyway, but it took a conversation to just get their attention, and finally they're opening their eyes, because I just simply said, we're about to spend $2.3 billion to rent or to build a brand new 16-acre downtown Dallas site. We're really not going to use any of that money to manage this or stewarding of the data or know anything. And they could not say no. So it just found out it had to get to the point of asking a question where no was not an answer. It wasn't an option. So it went back to my kids when it was time for the end of the night. It's like, are you ready for the bath? And they would always say no. So I finally said, do you want a shower or a bath? And they were like, I don't have the right answer. So that's what worked. And so now we got some traction. So now, anyway, so we'll be talking about it, I think. So that's all my story so far, is just the interest just now after 50 years of being what we are.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. I never cease to be amazed at how little information institutions have about their real property holdings. We had a variation of this conversation with Don this morning. You look at, state real property agencies, federal real property agencies. You look at the portfolios that some of you all manage. They're significant portfolios. If those were stock and bond portfolios, you'd be all over your analyst like a rash, wanting to know their performance, right? And you want metrics and numbers, but real estate, it's astonishing. So I'm glad to hear you've got some traction there, Scott. That's awesome. How about you guys at Ohio State? What do you guys, yeah, I know you have experience.
I mean, I feel like our biggest problem now is, you know, we grew all these separate solutions for different things. The work order management system, you know, the space data system. And now I feel like, you know, everyone's on board. They all see the vision, right? We all wanna, it'd be great if not only can we share data, but it can go back, you know, I can actually send information from the GIS to the work order management system. And I feel like that's where our struggle is. How do we not only just view the data from the space information management system? We can do that part. We can do that part in the browser or mobile. But now, how do I send my information potentially from the browser environment back to that other system? That's where I feel our problem is. And I also feel like a lot of this is kind of grown organically. It doesn't feel like we've had a good vision for, you know, we know what the end result is, but we're kind of like scrabbling ideas of what works. So it would be great if someone's already done all of this and is able to like push data both ways, not just view it, but push data both directions so that now they're using the GIS and they can now do a work order for that. And the work order guys can now access it. So that's our struggle. We're so big, we have so many different things.
What do you use for a work order management system?
AIM is our.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Niels.
And then they're moving to new things, so that doesn't even stay the same, right?
Right.
We're moving to the new med center, CMS, and you know, now we're getting on Workday, so.
Right.
Everything just kind of changes too much, so love to hear ideas.
Yeah, there's an interesting lack of standards, isn't there?
Yeah.
It would be one thing if all CMMSs had the same APIs, and you could program against a standard API to insulate yourself from that. It's not the world that we live in, is it?
No snip, no quick.
No.
No easy button.
No easy button. I got no easy button. Niels.
Well, I think you often use one of the easiest buttons out there, and that's FME. So.
That's fair enough. Yep.
Backing up on this is FME has become such a crucial part because it is a two-way. It can be a two-way pipeline for data and information. We're now starting to. So we just went through this huge upgrade with Tri-Read, and a lot of the customizations that we had done previously, like our space survey, we've completely scrapped because it was going to be too expensive to recreate it in the new version. So now we're actually doing the space survey in survey 1, 2, 3, and then being able to send that back to Tri-Read. FME is for us that solution to being able to go both ways and integrate data from all these different sources. So if you haven't done a whole lot of exploration with FME, it's the best thing since sliced bread.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's how we're getting our road data into GIS. It's straight, raw, FME, not just raw, yeah.
But it's,
But you can't push, right? Like, I can't be in my GIS now and somehow push my data back to
well,
Revit.
that's where you need FME server.
Yeah.
So once you get FME served, then you can start setting up those regular data pushes both ways. So that's the easy button. And I know it's the back end for a whole lot of stuff.
You also have Dr. Alexander Stepanov, who
Yes.
doesn't come readily out of any box that I'm aware of. You can't order another copy of him anywhere.
He's brilliant, and I'm very happy that I've kept him, and I don't let him go to conferences.
But is that presenting at all?
No, I've suggested that they come to this conference, and I'm gonna make that suggestion again, because they really should be here, because
I'm not
it's
familiar
such an
with that.
important piece of technology. It's an extract, transport, load, TTL program,
Okay.
and they can take 400 different data formats and turn them into 400 other different data formats. And so basically you're going from native format to native format, and it's, you can pull in all kinds of Python scripting, and also one of the best things about it is it's got this great graphical workbench that gives you all the documentation you need to document exactly what you're doing. And you don't need to be a programmer really to understand it. Even a Luddite like me can do some simple things in FME, and it's a great user interface. And they're also a wonderful corporate culture, and they're very higher ed friendly. If you have it, so last summer when I lost my graduate student, I hired another person, and I basically had got my act together to get a lot of work for her. So I said, here, take this week, just do all the FME training that you can do. There's a ton of it available, and learn FME because it is just such a huge part of everything we do here.
So do they have pre-built formats, or do you still have to go in and if you're gonna go from one system to another, do they already have the extract from
Yes.
load to this format, so you're not going in?
That's it. You just go to the menu, look at all the different extractors. And the wonderful thing about them is their naming conventions are so sensible. They're like what you might think it would be called. I mean, their naming conventions are very descriptive. So again, you don't have to be rocket scientist to
So most of the CMMS systems that everybody has.
Absolutely. So they have Tririga's stuff. They have Archibus. It's huge.
100%. Like, if you have that, I mean, we all have the GIS interoperability, and that's just a tiny sampling of FME's like ETL stuff, but the full thing, which is what we bought as well, it's totally worth it. I mean, it's 100% right. Super easy model, you just drag and drop stuff onto the thing, you don't have to be a coder, it's awesome.
And so, where should they go? Where would you tell them to go? I mean, isn't that's just safe software, right?
So safe software.gov.
Safe.
Sorry, safe.com. Thank you.
What is it?
Safe,
Safe.com.
Safe.com. They're based out of Vancouver.
Excuse me, I'm gonna interrupt here. It's 10:15 just about, so that's the end of the session. I wanted to at least allow us to thank you for the presentation.
Thank you all.